Welcome to the Exhorter podcast, where we aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical discussion. This is part 2 of our, I don't know if you call it a series, on addiction. And we're here with Jim Ruby. Jim, great job on that first conversation. That was awesome, man. You just showed a lot of courage and shared a lot of really deep stuff about addiction. And so we want to continue that conversation and talk about what the Bible has to say about it.
Yeah, before we kind of get into another section here, after listening to the interview, Jim, were there any things that you just kind of wanted to clarify or focus in on?
I don't know if I mentioned the number of people that when I was younger, in my high school days, and shortly after, when addiction was pretty strong. For one, family didn't give up on me. And there were some few people in the community, one lady in particular. She was part of a Bible study that my mom was in, and she was kind of in charge of campus life, Youth for Christ. And so she was always somebody that I could talk to, that was reaching out to me to talk. She, switching places, I would have given up on me a long time ago. And I think that's one of the points is, because I mentioned before, one of the most important thing is to talk. And for somebody to be there to listen. But she let me know that what I was doing was wrong, but she was always there. I could talk to her anytime. And she did things to try and, get me to change paths by getting involved in campus club or church. And I think that's what's important, is just not giving up. My family, they could have given up on me many times. Parents always let me know that they loved me. They wanted to help. I guess a lot of times in treatment, they probably call them enablers, which they were. But in the long run and looking back, I think that some of that is probably what kept me from taking that next giant step that a lot of my friends took, where they were being incarcerated, sent to prison. I just wanted to throw that in, that, as far as family members, don't give up.
Yeah.
Listen. And even if you're not a family member, if you're a friend or acquaintance and somebody wants to talk, listen.
It's hard to know because, who is going to be that person. I do think in someone's life when they're struggling, I think there is a person that has an opportunity or a best chance to reach out or make a difference in that person's life. And sometimes you might not be that person, but, someone might be. And I think that that's why it's important to have a lot of people, a tribe and a group of people on your side, not to give up on people. I like that because you don't know who's going to be that person that you might reach out to or that might reach out to you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jim. We'll probably get back in a little bit more about the interview and everything. But first, I wanted to just kind of break open the topic of addiction a little bit more. I want to set a little bit more groundwork for addiction, and then we'll get into addressing it from a biblical side. So we had talked about addiction being, a substance or something that has control over your life. Clinically, it's physically and mentally something you're dependent upon. Generally a substance, you're unable to stop taking it without incurring some adverse effects. I guess in substances, that would be withdrawal or detox. The Mayo Clinic actually categorizes addiction into 2 areas, which is interesting. So we talk about addiction. I think because of your background, we talked about specifically alcohol and substance abuse, but they categorize it into 2 areas of behavioral addiction and substance addiction. Behavioral being anything that you're doing, gambling, work, exercise, food, internet, video games, sex, pornography, shopping. And I saw some screen addiction. That's the newest, biggest thing. Behaviorally, you can be addicted to a lot of other things other than just, the substances. And then substance addiction being alcohol, illegal prescription drugs, tobacco, those kinds of things. So when we start talking about addiction,
you did not mention coffee in that list. So
we didn't. No, yeah,
Purposeful.
I purposely did not, Kyle.
Edit that out.
Yeah,
that's physical addiction.
Caffeine is a drug. It's not prescription though, or illegal. But it's important as we're talking about addiction, we might lean towards a couple specific ones because of the subject matter at hand. But A lot of other things can be an addiction to someone's life and can control someone's life and lead them down harsh rabbit holes that they cannot get out of. They control and overcome their life. So I just want to throw that in there. And a couple stats. Stats always just make me realize the problem and the impact of that problem. And so I just have a couple I'll throw out here, but about the different types of substance addictions, which I think is what we're kind of focusing on a lot. 39% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 25 have used drugs in the last year. That's almost 40% of our young people have used drugs in the last year. 70% of people who try drugs before the age of 13 will develop an addiction within 7 years, which kind of tracks. 47% of youth in the United States have used a drug by the time they graduate high school. And when it comes to alcohol, the consumption is wide. 86.4% of Americans over the age of 18 have engaged in alcohol, but that's over the age of 18. If you look at below the age of 15, those who try alcohol have 5 times higher risk of developing alcohol disorder than those who've had their first drink by the age of 21. Alcohol causes 10% of deaths among 15 to 49-year-olds. About 20% to 30% of people who take prescription opioids misuse them. And about 10% of those people become addicted to opioids, which is a huge pandemic right now. About 43% of American adults admit to trying marijuana. Roughly 10% of all marijuana users will become addicted to the drug. And then this is 1%, okay? But think about this. Just over 1% of 8th graders have tried meth as of 2020. 1%. I mean, we're talking nationally. 1% of 8th graders have tried meth. That's insane. All of these stats is just to say, statistically, this is a relevant issue to our nation. So it absolutely enters the church. I mean, I don't have some really accurate stats here of members in the church who have tried these things. I found some, but if it's so relevant out there in the world, it's such a big issue. It absolutely is in all of our lives. And, we're in the world. So that being said, there are a couple questions that we talked about back and forth before and some maybe misconceptions, and just want to kind of give some highlight to those. We talked about this predisposition to addiction and whether or not that's a real thing or not. And none of us are licensed clinical therapists. But from your perspective and your history, Jim, you've heard of this predisposition. What are your thoughts just around that?
When I was going to school for counseling, they talked about it as genetic predisposition. For example, they talk about twins growing up in the same household and everything. One becomes an alcoholic, the other drink occasionally, and nothing happens. So some kind of genetic difference. And I look at those as kind of theories. Mm-hmm. Because when I was going to school, there were all these different theories about, the predisposition. But for myself, I just look at it as personally, I didn't know where I fit in. I was insecure, had trouble talking to people. So in my case, I would say that was my predisposition, because once I tried alcohol and other drugs, it's like I instantly wasn't nervous or insecure. I could talk. It took all that away.
Well, there weren't any alcoholics in your family before you, were there?
No.
Or any...
one uncle, possibly. Okay. Don't know too much about my uncle on my mom's side. He died at a young age, hypertension.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as I know, I mean, if there was, they didn't talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it would be understandable that we're all products of nature and nurture. We're all products of what came before us and our genetics, but also in the house. So if you have a scenario where grandfather, father and son are all alcoholics, it could be genetics, but it also could be they saw it all their lives and it was accessible. So I don't know that really means anything different, other than I think that a lot of people use the disposition as a way to say, I don't have any control over it. And some of that is a mental illness focused, perspective of origin for addiction. And I don't think one can completely disclaim mental illness being a factor in there. We talked about dual diagnosis and things like that. But I do know that there's a difference between not having any control over your biologically and how you were born and what God has given us the ability to have control over.
Yeah, I never try to get myself involved with the scientific side of it because I just don't know what I'm talking about. And I don't know what it's like. Maybe someone really does have some sort of genetic disposition for something, and I don't want to get in that conversation and start, that's not the playing field I want to be on, whether it's aggression, violence, violent tendencies, alcoholism, substance abuse, or whether it's questions about gender identity or sexual attraction. I really just don't want to have that conversation about, well, were you made this way or not? Because I know I wasn't, and they're convinced that they were. So how are we going to see eye to eye? I am convinced in the Bible, though, that no matter what we might be born with genetically, whatever dispositions we have free will, and we have the ability to choose what path we will be on, whether it's what our body would want us to do or what our body would tell us to do. We have the ability to choose. And that's where I tend to make my argument based on scripture, because I'm confident in scripture. I'm not so confident in the science. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because they did do studies on alcoholics that had alcoholic parents. And I forget what the percentages were, but having one alcoholic parent increased the odds certain amount. Having both alcoholic parents increased it even more. Like I said, I don't remember the exact stats, but I mean that was one of the things that they went over as far as the predisposition. For myself, I'm the only one.
Yeah.
I drew the lucky card, I guess, or unlucky card. My parents, I think I'd mentioned before, very seldom drank. My sisters, they can have a glass of wine or a few glasses of wine when they get together, and that's it. But me, I am 200% sure that if I took a glass of wine, I'd be off and running again.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all or nothing.
So to that point, something I've heard in the past is once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Is that something you think and live by? Is that something that is that a safety mechanism? What are your thoughts about that statement?
I believe it.
Yeah.
I experienced it. Otherwise, after not drinking or using anything for 12 years, how would it have gotten so bad within just a few weeks once I took a drink? And then 5 years off. Mm-hmm. And once I start again,
riding bike,
it's almost as if I'd never stopped.
Yeah.
That's been the case with a lot of people in recovery groups and settings. I mean, you hear numerous people talking about that have gone back out and tried to drink socially again, and it just doesn't work.
Do you think that saying is out there because it tries to counter this perspective that once you've been sober for a long time, a lot of people think that they can go back to it or do it lightly, casually, as you said? Does that happen a lot? Yeah,
because I think, when I was more involved in recovery groups, that was kind of like, people would like to be social drinkers again. But, I know at a family gathering, my sisters asked me, well, does it bother you having, us having a glass of wine? And it's like, well, not really, because that's not the way I drink. I'm not a social drinker. Mm-hmm. Just having a glass of wine doesn't really make sense.
Give me a bottle and put me in a room alone.
Yeah, just throw away the cork. I'll have a soda. It tastes better. So
to that point, it might not be a trigger for you necessarily to be around people like that, but it can't be the case for everyone.
No,
and I think that's one thing that people need to think about, right?
Yeah, and definitely stress that in recovery is that you need to protect yourself, especially somebody new in recovery. If they're going someplace, a lot of times take somebody with you for support. Don't ride with someone. Have your own ride. So if you get uncomfortable, you can leave. Take precautions.
Also, someone's going to take you out of a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
If you're just wanting to hang out with old drinking buddies,
that's just
asking for
don't
trouble.
Do it.
Right. But that's my thing is I'm sure that happens, people not wanting to cut ties completely with anyone and everyone from that life.
Yeah. And I found that when I first got sober and got out, that the people that I hung around with and drank and used with, once I got out, there was like this, it was different.
You're no longer one of us.
Yeah. I was no longer one of them.
You were a quitter.
And I couldn't handle it. So, but then on the other hand, seeing how they were when they were drinking, it's like that wasn't really appealing to me. I mean, why do you want to be sober and around a bunch of drunks?
We could talk all episode about the medical side of it and being predisposed or not. And, I'm in over my head in that conversation, but I think time and chance is also a factor in this. At least that's my theory on this, that, maybe you're someone that isn't full-blown alcoholic, but not in that category of addiction yet. But you have a drink at the end of a day, takes the edge off a little bit, but you're pretty good about stopping. I just wonder how time and chance factors in. What if you have a really bad day at work or at the office, a really stressful week? What are the odds that one drink is going to become two on a really, really bad day? And, does that start you down a trend where, and then something unexpected happens, like somebody close to you dies, and that's something you weren't prepared for. And now it's like, you've already started this pattern of, I'll turn to this in a small way. I'll turn to alcohol in a small way just to take the edge off. But then I wasn't expecting this. This is really bad. I have not hurt this bad. So maybe this alcohol works for the small things, but maybe it'll work for this big pain too. And then I don't know. I believe time and chance has to factor into this equation too at some point.
Yeah, that's, seems like forever there's been this debate with, in the church. It's like, you have the right to drink. You're not abusing it. It's not causing problems. Do I have the right to have a glass of wine? Yeah. And, the other side of that is, well, no, you shouldn't, because you don't know how it's going to affect you. You don't know how it's going to affect others. But anyway, that's right. Without getting completely into that. Yeah. I mean, I get your point. It's like, well, okay, I'm just having one to relax, but I've had a really bad day at work. Maybe a couple will be better. That can start a cycle. It's like, my always thought was if one or two are good, 3 or 4 are going to be better, and 5 or 6 is great.
Yeah. Well, that's what scared me away from ever touching the stuff, because I know you mentioned food as one of those substances in about the Mayo Clinic, behavioral, and I can certainly relate. Like I turn to things for comfort all the time. Food is probably the closest thing I could say about addiction that I can relate to, and I know how I handle food. That when I have a bad day, I turn right to the food. I suspect that's what scares me about it, is I have this hard a time with this substance that, again, it's bad for my health. And if I treat food this way, it just scares me what I would do with alcohol, because I know that's my tendency to turn to things like this for instant comfort, even though it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the basis of, looking for something outside ourselves to fix us.
Well, that's kind of one of the main reasons I've steered away from it. A scripture like Proverbs 23 and verse 29, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes, and that wounds without cause. The idea was, there's an old Toby Keith song, nights I can't remember, friends I'll never forget. And I would reflect on that, or things like this, like you wake up and don't know how you got hurt. You don't remember the night before. And I've never reached that point where I thought, why do I need to forget? Why do I need to, why is that fun to do something that you don't even remember? You blacked out the night before. And so I think I appreciate what you're saying there about when you kind of sober up and see that perspective and just realize, like, when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see it. But when you're on the other side, you can kind of understand, like, what really is the purpose here? What's the benefit?
Well, the thing with people that don't remember, that have blackouts, it's that just happens. A lot of times with alcoholics, they can sometimes drink a lot, sometimes drink a little, and they go into a blackout. And basically a blackout is, it's just alcohol-induced amnesia. The memories aren't there. You never will remember it.
Or you wake up in the middle of what you're doing during the blackout and go, what am I doing?
Yes. And
that's no fun.
So a lot of people they don't remember a lot of the things. I remember too much. It's that kind of reminds me when you mentioned the behavioral or the psychological addiction. One hand they say marijuana is addicting, another time, people that use say it's not addicting. There's physical addiction, and then there's the emotional or psychological. And with marijuana, it's something that you can become dependent on without having the physical addiction.
Yeah.
And that's probably where they get away with that concept, is like, from a medical and biological standpoint, it doesn't create that physiological dependence, but it can become mentally, it can become the crutch you lean on that you've formed the habit that way. That makes sense.
And they tell some of the people that, came in the treatment, use a lot of marijuana. Well, if it's not an addiction, just stop using for a couple of weeks, see how it goes, but where as like, heroin, they know that's physical addiction. I didn't realize it until I went into treatment, but alcohol is probably one of the most dangerous drugs to detox from, which I'd mentioned, they told before I went into treatment, they told my parents, just, go ahead and get them some beer every day. That was kind of too cold to keep me pacified for one, but to keep me from going through withdrawals.
Why is that the case, you think?
For alcohol?
Yeah.
It saturates your whole body. I mean, people, when they detox, they have seizures, they go into DTs, blood pressure spikes. Yeah, I didn't realize it till I started working in treatment that they give them a lot of medications, keep the blood pressure down to make sure, anti-seizure drugs.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, that, and then, sedative, hypnotics, Valium, things like that have a strong physical addiction.
You mentioned before that I think I'd asked how easy it is to become addicted to something like alcohol. It's understandable that drugs or opiates or, these kinds of things, methamphetamines, they're designed to be addictive and, to get you addicted quick. When it comes to something like alcohol, maybe tobacco and other things, to you, it was really addictive. You said it didn't take long at all. Does it generally take long? I mean, do you think that most people, it's just like the other ones, or does this go back to those people who have addiction, tendencies already?
Well, I mean, say heroin. If somebody's using heroin, it feels so good. They use it the next day and they use it the next day and, before you know it.
Yeah.
And it's the same with, prescription painkillers are a big thing now. I mean, it's just, you keep taking them and then all of a sudden, you're
feeling all the pains
when
that
you stop taking
before,
them, you realize you're physically addicted to it.
Yeah.
You start having withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah. And so you equate the same thing with alcohol, or is it just
alcohol,
a different?
When somebody's drinking alcoholically, say every day, I mean, in time, your whole body's, all your organs are being saturated with alcohol. I mean, it gets into all your organs and everything. And I forget how long they said it takes to actually get all the alcohol out of your system. It takes quite a while. Immediate withdrawal is more like 3 or 4 days. The last time I was in detox, it was like for a week and a half, but there were some other pills and things and other things involved. But yeah, that's for the most immediate withdrawal. You're looking at 3, 4, sometimes 5 days from the alcohol, because it's, like I said, it's so dangerous. Basically, the more you drink, the more you're saturating your body, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, everything.
We also talked about dual diagnosis. Tell me how that can lead into this self-medicating.
Well, I don't know if I'm a real expert on that, but
or just the concept of,
say somebody has anxiety.
Yeah.
They don't know it. Well, I mean, guys, like in my case, I probably had anxiety. Once I tried some other substance, alcohol, I felt good. I felt normal.
Mm-hmm.
So who doesn't want to feel normal? And the anxiety was gone. I could talk with people. I could, I felt like I fit in. So if it worked today, it would work tomorrow and the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, they can kind of cover or fix some of the symptoms with dual diagnosis, but it's not a good fix because it's
a Band-Aid.
Kind of like, putting a Band-Aid on an infected wound. It's,
you're not addressing the root cause. You're just addressing the symptoms.
Exactly.
That sounds a little bit like a chicken and the egg kind of thing too, where you have multiple things going on. Does the second diagnosis, does that cause the alcoholism, or does it kind of feed off each other? That's kind of what it sounds like to me a little bit, where you have to figure one out and fix one before you can really understand the other.
I think that's one of the things I've heard, though, as an early warning sign, though. When someone does have depression, anxiety, and these kinds of things, they are at a higher risk of becoming addicted to substances because it's easy to self-medicate with those.
No, I was just going to say that, a lot of times in school, people are real quick, to say something's wrong with their kid. They put them on medication right off the bat. rather than, really talking. And if somebody, and I'm not against, kids or anybody that, needs some medication because of some other issues going on. But I think that at the same time, they need to be working with somebody because, again, the medication can be a Band-Aid in a sense. For some people, it and I'm probably getting out of my expertise here, but it can level out, some of the brain chemistries that may be out of whack. And that person may need to be on those medications. For others, it may be something that's temporary. But when we try to take care of it ourselves by taking something that, our friend over here has, or, well, so-and-so's on this medication, let me try something. You start self-medicating, then you get into trouble.
Jim, I had a question for you. I read this verse in Hebrews 3:13. It says, "But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." And I just had a question for you. What do you think is the relationship between addiction and sin?
Between addiction and sin?
That verse talked about the deceitfulness of sin and...
Yeah.
So what's the relationship between the deceitfulness of sin and addiction?
Well,
do those two cross paths?
Yeah, because when you're addicted, you're lying to yourself as well as everybody else. For example, when I was married and drinking and using all the time, it wasn't that there was really something wrong with me. It was her. If she was a better wife, if she would party a little bit like when we first met, then maybe I wouldn't have to go out with my friends and do it all the time. That's the deceit. I don't go and look at the mirror and say, that's the problem till the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, we find, it can be the spouse, it can be the parents, it can be the boss, it can be financial.
So you're the one with the problem, but you want to blame everybody else.
Yeah, I don't see me as the problem.
I think a big part of the deceit too is that it presents itself as a solution to the problem, but it's not. It's, why does a fish bite the hook? Because it's looking at the worm, not the hook.
Yeah.
And that's how any trap works, is you need some sort of suitable bait to entice someone to take the trap or get the hook sunk. But it offers to be a solution to the problem. And I think that's part of the deceitful nature as well, is what it seems like to me, that it really makes things worse in the long run. But for a moment, it takes all your worries away, but it leaves you in a worse position than before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I mentioned in the first part that after I'd been sober for 9 months, my dad passed away, did everything, did the funeral. And then I thought I could drink for a night. That would kind of relieve some of the pressure. And, I deserved it. And then I ended up getting in trouble the next night. And, I tried to use that as an excuse. I told the officer, I said, well, I just lost my dad. And he said, yeah, I lost mine a few months ago. He said, but I didn't go out and get drunk and go driving around. So sorry.
Yeah.
So, exactly. It looks like a solution. It's not going to fix anything.
Nate, to your question about its relation to sin, Jim, you told me that when you start drinking, or those who start heavily drinking like that, your morals go out the window. Like, what did you mean by that? Do you remember saying that?
Mm-hmm. Well, the drinking, the alcohol, and other drugs, it lowers your inhibitions. It changes your thinking. So, any defenses you have against, going against morals or whatever are kind of out the window.
Well, those moral aspects of our conscience protect us in the long run. And when you're drinking,
it numbs it.
You're probably not thinking long run. You're thinking like, hey, what's going to make me happy now?
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of numbs all those senses.
I'll deal with it later.
Yep. Yeah.
If I deal with it at all.
Yeah. The consequences aren't going to be that great. It's all right this time. It changes your thinking.
Well, that's another one in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 18. It says, do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. And when I think about this idea of dissipation, is it takes your focus, your ability to make good choices, your ability to face a decision and make a choice that is based upon what will glorify God. And it scatters that reasoning ability. It dissipates your mental awareness. And so you're not making good choices or God honoring choices at that point. And that's why it's contrasted with being filled with the Spirit, where being filled with the Spirit focuses your mind on the one purpose in life that is really satisfying, and that is to live out your purpose to glorify God. I think we all do things to cope with problems or stresses in our life that aren't really a solution. It's just that some of them, like drugs and alcohol in particular, have that greater degree of danger or risk to them.
Yeah, it fills a void, and it is a way of coping or dealing with things. And, in time, I know from my experience, didn't know how to live without it, because I got involved in it at a pretty young age. And so I kind of grew up with it. And so as I got older and became an adult, it's like that was my normal. And to take that away, that's terrifying.
Did you have to find something else to, I mean, if you remove one thing that was a part of your life that filled a void, I imagine you can't just leave it empty. Was that part of the solution in overcoming this, was you had to find something else to fill in that empty space or that void?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me now, it's God. And that's kind of the basis of the program, of recovery programs. Is part of that is helping others who are addicted, taking certain steps and being involved in recovery groups and basically helping another addict or alcoholic.
Jim, I got a question for you. When it comes to like 12-step programs and God and the church, what's the relationship between a 12-step recovery program and faith?
Well, a second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The first one is we have to admit we're powerless and our lives are a mess. In 12 steps, the 12 steps are geared towards developing a spiritual experience. They stay away from religion. People are free to do, however. But, the 12-step programs are meant to help somebody abstain from the alcohol or whatever drugs they're using.
Was it valuable for you?
Yeah. Because I had mentioned, I think my belief in God went to the extent that I better believe, because if something happens to me, if I die, I don't want to,
Yeah.
Which doesn't make really much sense, but
no, I get that.
It did. And I think what was happening simultaneously too was that, when I got into recovery, Jack had come. Yeah. And we had started doing some studies.
Yeah.
But throughout my time, I mean, I had mentioned the lady that was always there trying to help me. In fact, she had me do the sinner's prayer one time.
Yeah.
And what's supposed to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, taking me to church. So, I mean, there was some belief in God, some religion. I grew up going to a Presbyterian church.
Sure.
So I had some belief in God, I guess. And then, when I did get into recovery, I was, I started doing some studies with Jack, but I was focused on 12-step recovery.
Sure.
And doing what they suggested, because I had tried everything I thought of and it didn't work. So
aren't the 12 steps initially rooted in Scripture?
Yeah, they can be found. The principles of it can be found. You are you're talking to somebody else about the things you've done. You're confessing those.
Yeah.
You're going back and you're making amends to people you've harmed.
Mm-hmm.
You're continually working towards expanding your spiritual experience, and finally you're helping others. So I mean, the principles of the steps are
rooted in Scripture.
Yeah.
I just think there's something really powerful about, I know we don't like to talk about our failures or ways where we've made mistakes, but there's something so powerful about that testimony of, I struggled and I struggled greatly, but I overcame. There's something powerful about that tells someone in the midst of their struggle that they too can overcome. For decades and decades, the 4-mile barrier, running a mile in 4 minutes, was thought to be almost impossible or beyond the abilities of a human body to accomplish. And it was believed that it had to be like perfect 68-degree weather, perfect track conditions, and a huge crowd to motivate. But then 1954, Roger Bannister came and did it just a shade under, like 3 minutes, 59 seconds and 4/10, something like, just barely beat it on a cold and wet day with hardly anyone in the stands. Within a year, in fact, I was just looking this up, 46 days later, someone else, John Landy, an Australian, came in and beat it by a whole second. And in the 50, 60 years since, over 1,700 people have done it. It's become kind of the standard of competitive mile distance racers to beat that 4-mile barrier that was once believed to be impossible. But it's just amazing that when someone did it and proved, no, it's possible, it opened the door for countless other. Someone just had to prove that it could be done first. And I think there's something very powerful about, as much as we like to hide away those stories and not broadcast it, and I'm not saying we have to tell every detail of every mistake we've ever made, but there is something powerful in being humble enough to say, here's my past, here's my mistakes, here's what I've learned, and here's how I overcome. Here's how I overcame. And you're lighting the way forward for other people to follow in your steps, to show them that I did it, so you know you can do it too.
And you were talking about people with experiences, and basically that's how AA had started, was one person, an alcoholic that wasn't drinking, talking to another one. And that's how and that was the basis for, what we talked about, filling that void, keeping them sober, was by helping another one. And one of the things they talked about was going in and talking to somebody who was in the hospital and had attempted numerous times. And this was like back in the 30s, I think. But as the person that went to see him was talking, the person just kind of lit up, because here's somebody who was basically describing them, so the relation, seeing that there was somebody who was just like them, had gone through the same things, but wasn't drinking anymore, gave him hope.
It showed them that it could be done.
Yeah.
And you might not have believed it was possible. You might think,
no,
I'm in a pit that I can't get out of, and it's just not possible. But
yeah,
I did a little bit of research on 12-step programs and where they started. And I think it actually started in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And it came out of a group of believers who called themselves the James Club.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
No, I've heard of the Oxford group.
Okay, yeah. And they were very closely related, and the 12 steps evolved out. I think it was initially 6, and then they broke them down into 2 per. So very
smaller bite-sized pieces.
Did the church make it more or less difficult to get sober and stay sober?
I think it made it, for me, easier, because it replaced what I was doing before.
Yeah.
And it was so different.
Yeah.
It was a new experience. There were people in my life that actually cared. Well, there were people that actually cared about me before. I just stayed away from them.
Yeah.
And it gave me a different focus.
A new set of friends too. You talked about feeling out of touch with some of your drinking buddies. And I think it's so important to just recognize, how many times did Jesus reach out to people he wasn't supposed to talk to? The woman at the well, or Samaritans, or, the demon-possessed guy with the legion of demons in the Gospel of Mark. After he healed that guy, the townspeople were terrified to see this guy clothed and in his right mind. And I wonder if the ostracism remained even after this guy was cleansed of the demons. And I think it's a very important, your testimony is a very important message to Christians, that just because someone has a rough past or has struggled with addiction in some form or another, we need to welcome them into the family, because they need that family. They need that environment that maybe they hadn't had before. So I think your testimony is very powerful to that point.
Yeah. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind too, as Christians or members of the church. It's when we see somebody different coming in, maybe tatted out, and, maybe welcome them, let them know that they've got a place here. I kind of had it easy because my wife was already a member of the church. Janelle and Mike were members of the church. And so And I'd been studying with Jack and Nan. They knew who I was. So I kind of had an in.
Sure.
But no, I think just being open and welcoming to people. And
so to add to that, the phrase that came to mind is the church isn't a country club for the righteous, but a hospital for sinners. And
well, Jesus said it better when he said, I did not come to call those who are well, but the sick, sinners to repentance.
Yeah. I think that's important to remember that those people who might look a little bit different or who come out of those situations like addiction or whatever it might be, that we welcome them in and do our best to help. Jim, I got another question for you. What can we in the church do better to help those who are struggling with addiction?
keep communication open. Let them know, we're here. I wouldn't go shaking my finger at them and tell them, you better do this and you better do that. I would rather somebody who is having problems continue coming and keeping that door open as opposed to making them feel like they aren't fitting, they don't belong here because of what they're doing.
Sure.
I mean, as long as the person's showing up, then we can work on that.
Sure.
But once they walk away, it's going to be harder to reach.
Did you, even after you started your journey of recovery, did you feel that from the church? Did you feel like welcomed, like we are here to help? Or did you feel there's Jim, stay away?
No, I felt welcomed and
excellent.
Yeah. Like I said, I had an in,
mm-hmm.
but if I had just been walking in off the street, it might have been a little more difficult. Because like I said, one of my things, trying to fit in and this and that, it's, walking into a church with a bunch of strangers.
Yeah.
Knowing that they're all good and I'm not so good can make it difficult. So that's why I said we got to keep it open. But yeah, as far as members that may be struggling, keeping the door open, not pushing them away.
Yeah.
I think one of the awkward things to do is we've talked about accountability before. And I think that we understand like the root of that is just wanting to check in and wanting to make sure that people are on a good path, and one of the ways to do that is to have a good friendship. When it comes to trying to do that with someone, has an addiction in the past or maybe current, it's kind of hard to tell, is not wanting to be so intrusive into their lives and ask them, hey, how are you doing? Are you still doing good? I think that's kind of an awkward position. I'm worried that it could come off like you're just wanting to dig into someone's life. But most of the time it comes from, just really wanting to make sure someone's healthy and, sober and living a good life. Any suggestions to those of us that reach out to people or would want to have a better reaction to that desire to help?
Well, I think, on one hand, you see somebody and, well, how's it going? And you get the normal response, oh, yeah, it's going okay.
But how's
Once
it going?
Once in a while, somebody say, well, you really want to know?
Yeah.
But I think it would be more likely to come up in a conversation with somebody that you're normally talking with if they're struggling with something.
Yeah.
It's just like some of the people out in Sanger, I would see them. I saw that lady about 5 years ago at a funeral. And the first thing she asked me, she said, you still straight? And it's like, yeah. And there were certain other people, that's friends of parents and things. As soon as they see me, the first thing, how are you doing now? You still clean? But I expected it from them. They knew me at my worst.
But if you weren't, how honest would you be with them?
I probably wouldn't. I would have avoided them.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the kind of worry and risk, right? Is that you're,
Or I would have just lied to them.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Are all addicts liars?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Show me one who's not.
Yeah. No, that's kind of a survival thing. You're not going to tell somebody what's really going on. So.
Yeah, I get that.
The deceit is kind of hand in hand, which then it's harder to be there for them or reach out. Kind of going back to your first point in this whole podcast, which is never give up, always be there. It's not always going to be a lie. It's not always going to be a defense.
Yeah, it's not always going to be. I mean, somebody may just be at a point to where it's like, yeah, I guess I'm doing okay, but not really.
Yeah, you might get the brutal, honest truth, and that might be that start to recovery that they needed, still checking in with them. So I think that as brethren, when we kind of check in with people in their lives, is to always seek to love, always be optimistically, give them grace, and be open and willing to receive them in what condition they're in, but also, what they're willing to open to you. So
as we're talking about this, I just think, if you want someone to really open up, you got to have a relationship with them.
We say that all the time.
We talk about that a lot, right? And the people that have opened up to me about their struggles with addiction, or the people I've opened up to about what I'm struggling with, quite frankly, I don't do it with a guy I see once a week at the church building.
Yeah.
I do it with someone who I see regularly and talk to regularly, and usually I don't open up to them, in the foyer. Or they don't open up to me in the foyer. Hey, man, boy, I brought a 12-pack with me and I downed it in the parking lot. They're not going to tell you that, right? So go to Starbucks, grab some coffee and sit down and really talk with them about it. And that's, at least in my experience, that's where people open up and share with you, this is what's going on in my life, man. A lot of time they don't do it until you do it first.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not going to tell you about all my problems until you tell me about yours.
And you got to keep in mind, too, that when you do that, I think our natural reaction is to try and fix it.
Oh, sure.
Right then, well, maybe you need to do this, maybe you need to do that. Or, instead, is there anything I can do to help?
Yeah.
What can I do?
Thank you for that. Yeah. So just being available, letting them know you're available, not necessarily coming up with
the solutions
and suggesting.
Which, we're all good at. It's like, well, you just need to do this and that.
Because we're men. We solve all those problems at home for our women.
Well, the solution to the problem isn't always like a one and done thing.
Or different,
it's a process.
Or the same for every person.
Sure.
You went through multiple recoveries in different ways and took a while to figure out. Your solution was to bitterly exhaust you from the road you were on. And so, sometimes it's different. Fortunately, we still had you around by that time. One passage I want to bring up and we'll kind of close it out here. But when I read 1 Corinthians 10:13, I'm sure it's used a lot in recovery circles and things like this too. But no temptation has overcome you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. For those struggling in addiction, how impactful and important is that message from God?
Can be very important. Sometimes you have to look for that way out or that solution. A lot of times we just want like a magical solution to come down and the situation's gone, the urge is gone. But that can definitely be helpful because, God does provide what we need, but we've got to be willing to accept it.
Yeah.
And if that means getting out of a certain environment, detaching from certain people, that's what we need to do.
It gives us free will. It gives us all the ability to choose to make those choices. And I think that a lot of in your interview, you talked about these things just didn't happen to you. They were choices.
Mm-hmm.
And you also made choices to recover and to get out of those things. And I feel like even what unites us all is we all sin and we all are looking for a way out of sin, and just having that promise and hope from God that he does provide a way. Sometimes, yes, it's hard, or we have to go find it. We got to find the right one. And oops, we tried 18 others. Now 19, maybe that's the right one. And so just having that faith in God and believing that he does fulfill this promise for us. He does give us a way out.
Well, Jim,
he doesn't give us too much that we can't handle.
Jim makes us a great point, though, that the way of escape is not necessarily going to be an easy solution. He talked about cutting out friends or influences. And I think this could extend to that there are certain kinds of jobs that just lend themselves to substance abuse. And maybe it's a different career. A lot of jobs out there that I think just go hand in hand with this. And I was thinking of Mark chapter 9 in verse 43. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. For it's better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands go to hell. He just says it very matter-of-factly. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. Well, if you ever read the book Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Aaron Ralston, the guy who got stuck in the slot canyon in Utah, it's not an easy thing to do. But when it's your life on the line, it's the hardest thing you can imagine. It's a part of you. But he says, cut it off. get rid of it. That's not an easy, simple solution, but sometimes that's what the way of escape that you talked about in 1 Corinthians 10 might look like. Very painful, very difficult, and seeming like an impossible thing to do.
And for any sin.
And it'll leave you maimed.
Substance abuse and addiction stuff. So many other types of sins that are prevalent in people's lives that, I mean, that's the thing, is it's going to be hard. And
it will leave you maimed. That's what it says. Better to go through life maimed. You know, you might not completely recover, but at least you're alive. I mean, you might not overcome all of the side effects or consequences of these choices medically. I know some people have been in car accidents and been severely hurt by this, but they lived. And if that's what it takes to get them sober, that's exactly what he's talking about here, is it cost you greatly. But if that's what it took to wake you up, better to go through life in that condition than to be dead the other way around.
And with this conversation, John, to touch on what you said, I think the temptation is to say, oh, well, that person is an addict or that's addiction, and I don't have that problem. But we all have the problem of sin. And God, or Paul, when he wrote that, wasn't talking just to addicts. He was talking to Christians. He said, you know, there's problems. We all have problems. We go through these difficult situations. We're tempted to do these things, but God will provide a way of escape. And I think that that's important for all of us, whether we are stuck in addiction or whether we're just a Christian who's trying to live life, that, yeah, God provides a way of escape. And no, it's not always going to be what I want. And I may not leave unscathed. I might leave with a problem that sticks with me for the rest of my life. But it's better to exit in that condition than to stay in that sin.
Of course, in that context in 1 Corinthians 10, it's probably dealing with Christians who are seeing temple prostitutes.
but to the point,
more, Kyle.
But to the point, when you asked him what the connection and relationship between addiction and sin is, it was deceitfulness. Well, who doesn't lie about sin? Like no one wants to be honest about how much sin is in their life. Otherwise, we'd all be walking forward, you know, we'd all be taking care of that. So I think that the commonality here is it's harder with addiction. It's a harder struggle. Absolutely. A life-changing thing. But we all have the same struggle when it comes to the Satan and resisting. So we can find some commonality in there. I just want to say, you know, Jim, thanks for the interview. Thanks for being here with us. Really appreciate your being open and sharing us a portion of your life that gives us some life lessons and helps us kind of feel a little closer to maybe those people struggling in a different way. Anything that you would like to last say and parting words from?
Well, just that in addition to any of those that may be suffering, I hope that I say when, not if, when some of our young people are confronted with this or have to make a choice, you know, to go along with what friends are maybe doing, that some of this may give them something to think about. You know, they could be entering a tunnel that they don't know what's on the other side. So
that's part of that deceitfulness.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't look bad from this angle.
No.
Try looking at it from the other side.
Yeah. And you don't know what's on that other side. So yeah, I just hope that it gives some of them something to think about.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate this episode, and especially the last episode, being so forthright and willing to open up about your own experiences and some of the worst chapters in your life. I mean, we all have chapters we'd rather not have published in our life story, and it takes a lot of boldness and courage to be willing to share that in hopes that it will be a benefit to someone else's life. I mean, it's human tendency to hide our sins away. Look at Adam and Eve, the very first sin. Where are they when God confronts them? They're hiding. They're trying to pretend like their sin didn't happen, and that's mankind's nature. But 1 Peter 5:5 says we need to be clothed with humility towards one another. And James 5 talks about confessing our trespasses to one another. And I really appreciate your willingness and openness in sharing some of the events in your life. And I really hope this has been a benefit to someone listening, that if this causes someone to stop and think eternally or think about the path their life is on, then it's it's been worth it, I think. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And if this episode has been a benefit to you, or it might be a benefit to someone that please go ahead and share it, and go ahead and like and subscribe. We have new episodes every week. Thank you for listening.
You brought up 127 hours. It's not that sad of a story if you watch it backwards.
Yeah, it's about an amputee who...
It's the uplifting story of an amputee who finds an arm in the desert.
Yeah, I never watched that. I don't think I could handle.
It's intense.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite movies and books.
Really? Is it
What's
in
the name of
list?
it?
The movie is called 127 Hours. The book is called Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
Okay, I've heard of it before, and I think I've seen some
It is one of the
snippets
most graphic amputation scenes in realistic
Oh,
amputation.
my
When he
goodness.
gets the nerve, the sound that they make.
I can't
It's
stand with my wife.
you have got to watch
But the book is beautiful because he talks about, and everyone's like, Jessica's like, I don't want to read that book because he's so selfish going off by himself. It's like, yeah, that's the whole point. He learned that lesson.
So he was right-handed or left-handed when he wrote?
He's left-handed now.
Now he's
But if he lost his left hand, you would say he's all right.